Our guest in this segment is Senator Jason Barrett. He has worked his way up through the ranks. He was Delegate Jason Barrett at one point. Now he's elevated to the much more refined senatorial level. Good morning, Mr. Barrett. How are you?
I'm doing well. Good morning, guys.
Good to see you again.
I know there are a couple of delegates listening every day. I'm not going to take any shots at the House currently.
We understand a possibility of a special session for this weekend. What do you know about this?
Well, very little, and so I'm going to apologize a little bit for not being able to get into a lot of detail because, frankly, I don't have a lot of detail. And I was just made aware of a potential special session late yesterday evening over an economic development project. I think there's a lot of speculation about it. I'm not sure the information that's out there right now is accurate. And frankly, I don't really want I'm going to be cautious about the information I give because I don't have very much, and I certainly don't want to give any misinformation.
So what is the anatomy of a special session? Just the governor says, hey, I want...
The governor has to issue the proclamation for the call. Whatever he puts on the call is all the legislature can address. We can't go in and take up other legislation that we may feel is important. It has to, unless we call ourselves in. That there's another process for that. In my 10 years of service, that has never happened. Maybe John obviously served longer than I did. Maybe that's happened during his tenure, but typically it's always done by the governor. And again, we can only take up what he puts on the call. And I haven't seen a call. I don't even know if the call's been issued yet. I haven't seen it if there is.
But wasn't there I don't know what you call it, but a regular session, for lack of a better term, it's supposed to start on Sunday anyway?
No, those are interim meetings.
Interim meetings.
Where joint committees of both the House and the Senate meet throughout Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
But they can't take any action. They can't pass any laws or anything like that. Unless it's an actual session is the only way they can pass laws. And yeah, Jason, during my 26 years, we never had one of those. I'm told there have been only 2 special general sessions in the state's history. And that is when the legislature calls itself in. And I think the reason is when the legislature calls itself in, it is a special general session, which means any delegate or senator can introduce any bill they want about anything. And the fear is, oh, Lord, we're going to stay here a month.
It's wide open if the legislature does it.
Well, when the governor calls them in, the governor says these are the items to discuss. And in recent years, governors have gotten really slick about writing the call in such a way that in some cases it's almost impossible to even amend the bill that the governor submits.
You're right, and some of the things that we've had to do because those calls are so narrowly tailored is to go back to the governor and say, hey, we need this call amended because in order to get the bill passed, we have to make some changes to it.
Yeah.
What is left that is a major lift for the legislature on the governor's agenda that before he goes out soon, become a senator, has not been accomplished?
I don't know that I have an answer for that. I don't know what, I think largely a lot of the things that have accomplished over the past number of years are really items driven by the legislature, kind of in a partnership with the governor. I don't think a lot of this is, and I'm not trying to take credit away from the governor. I'm just stating that this has been a joint effort for a lot of these things, whether it's taxes, Hope Scholarship. There are a number of things that the legislature, DHH, or the number of things that we have taken on. Some of those are ideas out of the governor's office, but a lot of them were actually ideas out of the legislature. So I don't know that I can pinpoint one thing right now that I could say this was on the governor's agenda over the past 8 years, and this is the last thing left to do. I don't think I can point to something.
You had mentioned that maybe this special session was going to be about an economic development project. Do you know where it is?
Nope.
Okay.
And I don't know that it's for a specific project. I think it may be for the potential of specific of future projects.
Okay.
You were on the Finance Committee in the House. You're on the Finance Committee in the Senate.
No, I'm not.
You're not any longer?
No, I was. My first year I was on Finance, and in my second year I have a stint on Judiciary.
That's right. Yeah. We're still going to talk finance with you.
No, that's fine. It's good. Yeah.
And you mentioned Hope Scholarship a moment ago in your litany of things you were describing. That's been accomplished during the last 8 years here. And John Gilstrap, just about 15 minutes ago, asked the question, when a child moves from having accepted Hope Scholarship money to go to another school, let's say a private school that charges tuition, and after October leaves and goes back to the public school, we've learned in talking with various officials out of the school system that money does not follow them back to the public school. And John Gilstrup asked the question, well, where does that prorated portion of the money go? And the best we can figure is it stays with the education department in the state. Is that correct?
Well, the Treasurer's Office manages the Hope Scholarship, and they may be better suited to answer that question. I don't have the exact answer on where that money goes, and does it go to the school? Does it just stay at the department, or does it go back to the school? That's a little far in the weeds for me.
Rob, you got Riley Moore on speed dial?
I do, actually. I'll send him a text during the commercial break. Hey, Riley, what do you know about this? I'll go, Rob, that's a little bit in the weeds for me. That's right, what it'll say for me. Well, we're back to the weeds. Here we go again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the state's finances,
Sure.
because the average surplus per month through, I guess, 5 months has been $1 million.
That's right.
Last month it was $18 million, which brought that average up to $1 million.
Yep.
There are some bills coming due. January, a tax cut kicks in, additional tax cut, and additional Hope Scholarship money will be going out the door 25, 26, and presumably 27, more each year as the program becomes more popular. And my goal is to not criticize the Hope Scholarship program. In fact, I'm in favor of it.
Sure.
But that does create some holes in revenue. Are you concerned about the state's finances right now with those bills coming due and the slowdown of revenue coming in?
I wouldn't say that I'm concerned and certainly not worried, but I think that we have to be mindful of them, and I think that we have to be very fiscally responsible when we go back into session starting in February and when we put together the budget. And I would expect a fairly lean budget coming out of the new governor. I think that Governor Morrissey has clearly shown in his time in office in West Virginia that he's very conservative. We have, I think, done a good job of reining in some agency spending over the past several years with some of the flatline budgets. But when you look at just natural inflation, and I'm not talking about the record inflation that we have, it does get a little harder and harder for agencies to function without some increase in revenue. And they have done, for the most part, a lot of the agencies have done a nice job with finding efficiencies. And I think everything that I've heard out of Governor-elect Morrissey is that he is going to continue to ask these agencies and really expect those agencies to find more efficiency. So there are things that the Hope Scholarship, the school aid formula, all these things are really tied together. And so when we do, for example, if we do a pay raise for teachers and school service personnel, that affects the school aid formula. Then that affects the amount of money for Hope Scholarship. All these things are kind of tied together, and it is very complicated and very convoluted. And I think that we're going to, see with PEIA. I think that's going to hit the budget again. So there are things, to your point, there are things that are that are going to be expenditures that we're going to have to make, that we're obligated to pay for those couple of bills that have passed. And I think the finance committees in both the House and the Senate are going to have to do a really good job of being mindful of taxpayer money. And to your point, there's another 6% tax cut coming in January.
Are the revenue projections so close because revenue has slowed, or because we have more realistic projections now?
That's a good question. I think it's probably some combination of both of them. We are down roughly $200 million in collection right now than we were last year. So I think that certainly it's clear that we're collecting less money, and some of that is slowed. But when you put tax cuts in there, that plays a huge role in the amount of money that you're collecting. So, at $5 million above estimates right now is a good thing. The days of $200 and $300 million over revenue estimates are probably a thing of the past. So I think that, and I haven't had conversations with Governor-elect Morrissey to figure out, is he going to hold back those estimates a little bit the way that the current administration has? I think there's a fundamental question that comes up is, should the legislature play some role in revenue estimates, or should that be done entirely by the executive? Now, as a member of the legislature, I think most of us would say, well, the legislature should have some role in that. But the practical application of that is with the governor doing it, and with a governor who is being mindful of spending money, for them to limit those revenue estimates a little bit to control the legislature from getting in and spending too much money and giving tax cuts so big that we can't afford them moving forward. And that's why when we've talked about doing these tax cuts, and we've implemented these tax cuts in the past, we have tried to follow what the natural growth in the economy is, or in the budget is, moving forward, so that we really didn't take into consideration the hundreds and hundreds of $millions in excess revenue that we are collecting above estimates. We didn't really factor that in when we determined what the tax cut was going to be. We tried to stay with that $150 million annual increase in natural growth in our budget over the number of years with flatline budgets, to say this is how we actually afford tax cuts moving forward, because none of us want to give a tax cut and then come back a few years later and say, well, we took too big of a cut out of the apple, or bite out of the apple. Now we have to go back in and try to generate more revenue and put taxes back on. That's the last thing any of us want to do. And I think that the legislature really has done a good job of ensuring that we haven't gotten over our skis as it relates to tax cuts.
Should you have stuck with the trigger number, Jason, as opposed to adding the additional 2%?
Well, I think that was a negotiation of, there were things that the legislature, I'll be honest, the Senate was a little hesitant to want to do that. And as you recall, the governor wanted a 5% cut. He is very much a negotiator. He will, obviously ask for a lot and settle for a little less. So we knew that going in. There were some bills that in that special session that was important to members of the Senate and the House. And so we came to that agreement to do that additional 2%. But I think, again, back to your point, if you put triggers in, and if we all agreed on the triggers, and that was the mechanism moving forward to implement tax cuts, why are we not allowing that to work? I think that's your point, and I think that's well taken. But it's, again, you're dealing with the executive branch and two houses of the legislature, and those are just the politics of how some of it plays out.
Yeah, Jason, back to this question of from whence cometh the budget. That should it be entirely in the hands of the governor to determine the estimates? A whole lot of states with part-time legislatures allow the legislative branch to formally participate in this process in some way or another. And there are any of a number of different ways you could do it. And I've always believed that we ought to. It is interesting, the history. Currently, it's what's called the Modern Budget Amendment, which was passed about 60 years ago. The change was that prior to that, the budget came from a negotiation between the governor and the other statewide elected officers called the Board of Public Works. And you had people who were elected independently of the governor, so there were some different ideas that were permitted into it. They changed it then and basically gave it to the governor. And I think that the weakness there is that if a governor wants to fudge the numbers to benefit some idea that the governor wants, there's no check on that.
It is a lot of power to one position. I would concede that.
And particularly since under the American form of government, the legislative branch is supposed to have the power of the purse. It seems to me that there ought to be some vehicle to get them knowledge. And I think that Legislative Services is already equipped to be handed the role of being something like the Congressional Budget Office, to do the estimating themselves and say to the governor, wait a minute, you've got this one here. We think you're wrong about that. So it begins a negotiation where there's a more even balance between the governor and the legislative branch than there is now.
Mr. Gilstrap.
Has the governor-elect tipped his hand at all to any major shifts in priorities in his administration over the last administration?
I haven't heard. I have not. I have had a couple conversations with the new governor over the past, since Election Day. But I really haven't gotten into any specifics with him about what a couple of his top priorities are and how they may change from the current administration.
And because the state is organized as such a top-down organization, aren't his priorities going to pretty much drive y'all's priorities in the House and Senate?
Well, I think when you're talking about passing legislation, I mean, he will submit bills to the legislature, but it will ultimately be up to us whether we decide to take any action on them or not. With the revenue estimates, that obligation falls squarely on his shoulders, but actually passing legislation and putting things in the budget to spend money is really a function of the legislature. So I think that it will be a very good working relationship. I fully expect this governor to be a lot more hands-on than the current governor. I think it's just different styles. I think that you look at the way that Governor-elect Morrissey has operated in the Attorney General's office with taking a very active role and really leading every day in that office. I would expect nothing less than that out of his role as governor.
No follow-up, Mr. Gilstrap?
I see we have a minute left. Is that
You have 90 seconds. If you have a 90-second question.
I have a follow-up.
okay?
I have no doubt that Governor Morrissey will show up for work.
You trying to draw Mr. Barrett into a
And no, that wasn't a question. That was simply a follow-up remark. So no one has to respond to that if they do not wish, but they may, should they wish.
Are you lobbing bombs from the opposition party, Mr. Doyle? Is that what's going on here?
No. I just complimented Governor-elect Morrissey.
Jason, we've got 1 minute left before we take the break here, and I want to ask you about the extraction revenues from the extraction industries. Are those being factored in, or have they been excluded in regards to what you're looking at as the surpluses
for
the month?
So the severance taxes are not factored in the triggers of the personal income tax reduction. However, when you get the monthly report of the surplus and where general revenue is at the end of the month of that $5 million over the course of 5 months, or if we talk about November numbers where we finished $18 million ahead, absolutely severance tax money is in that. Severance tax for the year is down $27 million, which is why we never wanted it to be part of the equation when calculating the personal income tax reduction, because it is incredibly volatile and it's like riding a roller coaster.
I remember a few years back when the teachers' unions wanted to use it as a way to cover PEIA costs.
From gas severance, right?
Yeah,
and then as that price changes, the tax collection changes.
Senator Barrett is staying with us an entire hour. We are in studio with New York Times bestselling author John Gilstrap.
Good morning.
Former Delegate John Doyle.
Good morning.
Senator Jason Barrett.
Good morning.
Jason, during the break we were joking because somebody brought up the contribution on our Facebook section about the governor's contribution from the governor's contingency fund to put in new basketball floors at Greenbrier East and West, and he, of course, coaches girls basketball at one of those schools. We know about the $10 million to Marshall's baseball field. I think the governor went to Marshall, if I recall correctly.
That's my understanding.
And we know about the state legislature having one of the sessions was at the Greenbrier, if I remember, at some point along the way. So I guess the question comes down as this. Could any governor in any other state get away with this without there being a press uproar over what would appear to be favorable conditions for money going to certain places?
I don't remember the legislature having a session in the Greenbrier.
Wasn't there a meeting?
Interim
there?
meetings. I think there were interim meetings.
There was one of the national conferences for legislators at the Greenbrier this past year.
Fair enough. Still?
but and I'm not defending what you're saying, or I think kind of the direction you're going. But if you're going to have something like that in West Virginia, where else are you going to have it? So that's the only thing that I would say about that. As far as the basketball courts, I don't know whether that is excessive or not. I have never been to either Greenbrier East or West. I have no idea of the condition of the basketball floor, the court there. So I understand how it looks, and I'm not defending it.
It's not so much the need for the replacement so much as the governor's discretionary funds being used to replace it, I think, is the reason why people are asking.
Well,
about
and I
this.
think that's a fair point. And so the question I would have is, when is the last time the governor's contingency fund used things at specific schools in the past, or like projects? And I think if there's a precedent of that, then okay. If there's not, then maybe that doesn't look very good, and maybe that's not the best. I think there were plenty of ways to ensure that the basketball courts had the appropriate floor and what those kids need to play sports. I don't know that taking that out of the governor's contingency fund is the best look. And again, I don't know what the history of doing that is.
What's the real reason for the contingency or discretionary fund?
Well, I think for specific projects and things that need to be done in a quick and efficient manner without having to bring the legislature in to spend every nickel that needs to be spent for some issue. Now, the governor's contingency fund can be things for if there's some type of flood or some type of issue where the governor has to act quickly and needs to get funding somewhere without bringing 134 people to Charleston to push the green button to say, yeah, it's okay to do that.
Is it a defined pot of money?
It is. It's in the budget. It's a specific amount of money.
When that pot of money was originally created 30, 40 years ago, I'm thinking, the idea was it was supposed to be for emergencies. The definition has expanded considerably since then, and now it is commonplace for governors to use it for just things they want to do, and it's rather than as Senator Barrett said, rather than call the legislature in, I'll just give it for this out of my contingency fund, and I think it's gotten to the point where it needs to have more restrictions on it. Now, the $10 million for the Marshall baseball field, it's my understanding, did not come from the contingency fund. It came from some other fund that had been directed by the legislature.
It was leftover ARPA funds, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right.
But nevertheless,
yeah,
it was directed at the governor's alma mater.
That's exactly right. Yes.
And my question was, in any other state, if this happened, would it be treated the same way or looked at the same way?
It's interesting.
Where there's more scrutiny.
Yeah, I'm remembering. And maybe in other states these things happen and there aren't more scrutiny. The Charleston Gazette-Mail certainly made a big deal out of this, as did Mountain State Spotlight and some of these other West Virginia Watch. But most of the newspapers around the state paid very little attention to it. That is correct. Now, I'm remembering, 4 or 5 years ago in Mississippi, when Brett Favre arranged for money from the Department of Health and Human Services, or I think is what they called it, what we would generally call welfare money, to be used to build a gymnasium at the University of Southern Mississippi, primarily for volleyball, because his daughter was playing volleyball at the University of Southern Mississippi. That got to be a big national scandal, but I think in large part because it was Brett Favre. It was if it had not been for somebody of his national stature, that probably would not have become.
Well, he wasn't the governor of Mississippi at the time either.
No.
Why shouldn't my sense of fairness be offended here? Because just on Monday we had Sandy Hamilton in here talking about the whole process of school superintendents coming hat in hand and going to the SBA begging for more money, and there's a finite pot of money. But if the governor can write it,
this should be an SBA.
Yeah, and if the governor can write a check with my tax dollars for a place that he likes to coach basketball. That just does not seem reasonable to me.
Yeah,
it's a hard point to argue. And I'm not going to attempt to do that.
Jason, let's talk about the Game of Thrones that goes on between the end of an election and the new legislative session, which in an election year for the governor is delayed to February. So there'll be a lot of changes, and a lot of those changes involve leaders out of the Eastern Panhandle. Of course, even in the Senate, where you had the Senate President, Craig Blair, you had the Senate Judiciary Chairman, Charles Trump, who will go to the Supreme Court. In the House, the Majority Leader was Eric Householder. Paul Espinosa was the Speaker Pro Tem. A lot of changes will be taking place in Eastern Panhandle leadership. So the area will be looking for new people to step up. Where does that leave Senator Jason Barrett?
Well, I'll be able to answer that a little better, I hope, Sunday night after our caucus. I think we're going to caucus at 3. The way the process works, just to catch everybody up, is that when the new legislature comes back, that the state party will call in both the House and the Senate members separately to have a caucus, and at that point, once that's done, the state party leaves the room. The only people left in the room, in our case, will be the 32 Republican senators that will be sworn in at the beginning of 2025. And at that point, there will be a process that where we choose our next Senate president. Whoever that is will then have the discretion to make committee chair assignments, leadership team assignments, and that process that Craig Blair handles now.
There are 3 names I keep hearing thrown about for Senate President. One of those is a regular guest on our program, Eric Tarr, who's the Senate Finance Chairman. Do you know at this time who is the front runner, or what, at least in terms of the talk amongst the senators?
I think it's a close race between the 3 names that you hear.
Who are those 3 names?
Finance Chairman Eric Tarr, our current Majority Leader Tom Takubo, and the Energy Chair Randy Smith. Mm-hmm. So I think that the 3 of them have, over the course of the summer and now into the fall and winter, have been making their case to the members of our new caucus as to why they think they're best suited to be the president. I've said on this show last time I was on, I think when you asked, is that I'm supporting Eric Tarr to be the next Senate president.
What are the ramifications of that to you if he does not become the next Senate president?
I don't know that there are ramifications. There is a lot of speculation from the outside that if you support the wrong person, and I don't think I am, but if you support the wrong person, the person that doesn't win, I should say, to be the presiding officer, that then comes with some type of
consequence.
Right. And I don't foresee that in this case to be that. So
I think that's more a case in the House.
Well, I didn't want to say that,
in
but
the Senate. No, because excuse me, in the Senate, every senator is on one of the 2 major committees, Finance or Judiciary. So either way, you've got significant authority just from that. In the House, there are 4, actually more than that. There are 4 official major committees, 2 or 3 others that I call mid-major, and then a bunch of minor committees. And the Speaker of the House has more flexibility to put someone on a less prestigious committee than is the case in the Senate. So I do think there's more of that historically in the House. And that doesn't make any difference. That's regardless of which party is in charge. Yeah.
And doesn't that algebra change a little bit because the president's chair is vacated now because Craig is leaving? If someone challenges the sitting president of the Senate, I'm going to guess that there are consequences.
I think you could probably look throughout history and show examples of when that happened.
Oh, there's an old quote, if you come at the king, you must kill him, right?
Right,
so
and I think there are probably some instances where that didn't happen. And, I think some people I think it's just whoever the person is, the personality is, and how they view those type of challenges. And so
you have served on, as you mentioned earlier, the Judiciary Committee. Explain the importance of the Judiciary Committee, because it is a committee. When I interview folks who are coming through this place on their way to office for the first time, many of them mentioned that they'd love to get on judish.
Yeah, and I think it's, the difference between finance and judiciary for me is, would you rather deal with words or numbers? And for me, I tend to think that I'm better with numbers than words. But judiciary is without question one of the most important committees in the legislature, and all bills of real significance and consequence that really don't deal with money go through that committee. And Senator Trump has done, a fabulous. I don't think there's no one that I know that impresses me more with the knowledge of our state code than Charlie Trump.
I would agree.
If you ask him about a specific section of code and you just say what it does, he will tell you the code reference. To my knowledge, and I don't think I'm exaggerating with this, he basically has the entire code memorized. And so
it's like that guy on the Suits TV show.
What was it? Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I joke that, I was new to judiciary, and, they said, Jason, hey, you're new here. I said, yeah, but I've watched all 9 seasons of Suits. So,
I got that.
I'm not a lawyer, but I've watched 9 seasons of Suits. But and I will tell a quick, it's funny to me, it may not be funny to anybody else, is that typically when you're in the committee, the council will explain the bill. Members then will ask the council questions about what the bill does or doesn't do. Really not what the policy should or should not be, but what are the technical questions to the bill you ask the council. If there are people in the audience that have some interest in the bill, that have some expertise, that want to weigh in on what the policy of the bill should be, then members can ask by leave of committee to have that person come to the podium and field questions. And so typically in committees, the member initiates, hey, I want to hear from person A in the audience. When Charlie Trump is the judiciary chairman, it is just open mic night to some degree. And I say that, I'm not being critical, but he offers that to anybody in the audience. I mean, we joke with him that we're going to open the window and see if there's somebody outside that wants to come talk to a bill. But what that does, it gives you can't leave the committee room and say, I didn't get to hear one side. I didn't get to hear an opinion that I wanted to hear, or I didn't get to hear someone's take. He offers that to everybody, and it doesn't matter how long we're there or how many, what time of the night it is. That's just the way he operates the committee. So judiciary is, it is very tedious. It's going through bills, just with a fine-tooth comb, and what does and mean in the sentence? To some degree, it's that in the weeds, because words have consequences.
Shall and may, right?
And words have consequences, and so for freshman members to get on the judiciary committee, that's in the House, because like John said, in the Senate you either get finance or judiciary, but it's quite an undertaking to jump in the deep end, really, to go to that committee and try to wrap your mind around not only the legislative, the parliamentary process, but to really dive, line by line, word by word in bills that sometimes are a couple hundred pages.
We know that you do not have to be an attorney to be the judiciary chairman.
That's right.
Would you like to be the judiciary chairman?
I'm going to serve at the pleasure of whoever the president is. I don't know what, I can't confirm what role I'm going to be offered or not offered, depending on who the next president is.
And inspecting,
and I don't say this to be arrogant, mm-hmm. but I don't think there's a job in the Senate that I can't do. And with that being said, there are a lot of senators I think they can do every job as well. I think that those of us with enough experience have the ability to. Am I an expert in all those different fields? No. But I think I do have the ability to certainly run any committee.
What's the heaviest lift the Senate will have to undertake in the next term?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think we'd all have a different perspective on what the top priorities are. For me, it always comes back to, we have one job that we have to do, and that is to have a balanced budget. And so first and foremost for me is always about trying to make sure our state finances are in order, we're able to have a lot of economic development coming to our state. West Virginia has been well positioned over the past number of years. We have landed a lot of great opportunities in our state, and all of that comes back. The single thing that always comes back to is our state's financial position. And so, at the top of my list is always to ensure that we are on sound financial footing currently, and the policies that we implement continue us on that path moving forward.
We will have a governor who is from the Eastern Panhandle. First time this has taken place, as I understand it.
Well, it depends on how you define Eastern Panhandle.
I just define it as the immediate far Eastern Panhandle of Berkeley, Jefferson, and Morgan County. I know there was an extended 11-county Eastern Panhandle governor previously.
Well, one from Hampshire County, which is not all that far away. But you're right. If you define it as the Eastern three, that is correct. Yes.
So when you look at it, you can see two different lights being looked at here. One is he would go out of his way to not look like he's favoring the Eastern Panhandle, or he would actually have a better understanding of locality pay and how that affects the Eastern Panhandle, the need for additional highway funds, maybe even the need for moving the state highway office into Berkeley or Jefferson or Morgan County instead of where it is now. Jason, do you see that tug of war within the office?
I mean, I see the perception of that. I think that, Patrick Morrissey has served, I think, 3 terms as the Attorney General from the Eastern Panhandle. So, yes, does he have a unique understanding of our challenges here that previous governors don't? Of course he does. But I think that it's a fine line for any governor to walk with, doing what is in the best interest of the state. And then also helping out your area. And I don't think that means to give unfair treatment to some areas or to have this us versus them mentality. But, I think that, when good things happen in other parts of the state, that's good for the Eastern Panhandle too. And I think that's the approach that Governor-elect Morrissey will take. I wouldn't expect him, and I don't think any of us from the Eastern Panhandle should expect him to go out of his way to treat us in an unfair way. I think that the couple of issues that you talked about that are really unique to the Eastern Panhandle, because he has an understanding on that, I would expect him, to take the lead on some of that and try to make some of those changes that benefit the Eastern Panhandle. But I don't think we're going to do things to the Eastern Panhandle for the Eastern Panhandle that are to the detriment of anyone else. But again, he is traveled this state. He's served as the Attorney General for 12 years. He knows every area of this state and what those unique needs are. So, I think it's absolutely a good thing that we have a governor from the Eastern Panhandle who does understand our unique challenges.
Whatever you can do, whatever strings you can pull to get broadband internet to my house, I would really appreciate it. Okay, just throwing that out there.
Well, why don't we talk to the current governor and see if the contingency fund might have
there you
something
go.
available.
There you go.
You just need to put a basketball floor down.
It can never be used.
You have a basketball court in the basement, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
He doesn't have room for a basketball court in the basement. Jason, about a minute left here. You used a particular strategy to advance the cause of locality pay in the last session. Will you come back to that in this one?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we'll put a little tweak on it, maybe, and that's something that we're always going to continue to work towards. We've kind of slid that in a little bit with corrections to give those facilities that have critical need, to give that agency the ability to do some increased pay when there are some critical vacancies there. So I think that we may look at doing some of that for some of our other state agencies.
You have a prediction for the Steelers-Browns game this weekend?
Well, I hope it's a hell of a lot better than the last Steelers-Browns game. I'm going to say 27-17 Steelers.
And you can't go, right?
I cannot go.
My dad
and stepmother are going, actually.
Well, that's good. At least the tickets are being used.
They are.
Hey, thanks for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Senator Jason Barrett, as we wrap it up with the final minute next.